Let's take you back to Venezuela. We were hearing before from a reporter there talking about the difficult conditions for journalists to be operating on the day of elections today, and more generally the state of the country. It used to be one of the wealthiest in Latin America. Well, those elections ongoing today in the midst of this call from the main opposition bloc, Vente Venezuela, Come to Venezuela, saying that don't vote, don't give, quote, this repressive, brutal regime any credibility today. Some of the main leaders in hiding, including the Nobel Prize nominee, Maria Corina Machado, another key figure arrested overnight as well. I want to bring in a guest on this in Caracas, Phil Gunson from the International Crisis Group. Philip, great to have you on the programme this evening. Just set out for us how signed and sealed do you think this election is today?
Thank you. Well, it's signed and sealed in the sense that the government totally controls the electoral authority and the conditions on the ground. The results will be the results that are announced. Will be the results that the government feels are most convenient for it. There's really very little way of challenging those results, either in terms of presenting the genuine vote tallies or of going to any independent adjudicator afterwards to challenge the results. So really, it's a question of how much opposition the government is prepared to tolerate at this point.
What do you make of you've followed this for many years, the state of the ability of the opposition to rally, to call for a democratic voice to be heard. The fact that we know, actually, it was, I think, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, was one of the key figures to put Maria Corina Machado up for a Nobel Peace Prize this year, to be one of those nominees. Where do you think that sits right now? And I mentioned Rubio because I guess is the support of the Trump administration a factor here?
That's right. Of course, there's a battle going on within the Trump administration over how to approach Venezuela policy. And there are those like Marco Rubio himself who believe that a policy of maximum pressure, like the one that Trump applied in his first term, is the way to go in order to produce regime change, in order to get Maduro from power simply by besieging him, if you like, applying the maximum isolation and the maximum number of sanctions. And then there's another faction that say, well, really, we can make a deal with Venezuela even if Maduro is in power. And the important thing for the United States is to be able to deport what they call illegal Venezuelan immigrants and criminals from the US, and also to restore US access to Venezuelan oil. Venezuela, of course, has the largest oil reserves in the world, they claim, and certainly has been, in the past, a major oil producer, very important to the United States. So that's one of the issues. And then the other issue is the division within the opposition itself between those hardliners like Maria Corina Machado, who again believe in maximum pressure, don't believe in participation, in electoral participation at this point, and those who think that the only way forward is some form of negotiation and to keep on hammering at the door, if you like, electorally, even though the conditions are so bad.
It's a very interesting point to take those two issues. So you have, and it explains what's going on in the elections today, doesn't it? We have a big part of the opposition bloc, Vente Venezuela, saying that you should boycott. There's a smaller opposition as well saying, no, show the dissent, show that voice, which kind of fragments the overall narrative. And then we go back across to the US, as you talked about. You talked about this maximum pressure policy. Let's go back to 2022. I think it was Joe Biden, wasn't it, that decided actually there was criticism. It was giving too much to be exploited by Russia, Iran, China, some of the adversaries of the US to come in and keep this government afloat, to which there was a targeted sanctions instead. And what you're saying now is the Trump administration looking again at that, possibly going back to more severe sanctions. And I think I'm right in saying as well, one area that Maria Corina Machado seems to have successfully lobbied is having secondary sanctions, tariffs. I think it's something like 20-30%, isn't it, on any countries that are buying oil from Venezuela.
That's right, yes, 25% additional tariffs on any countries whose companies participate in the Venezuelan oil trade, which of course has driven the oil trade, or is driving the oil trade back underground, disguised shipments, shipments relabeled as not coming from Venezuela and so on. The sanctions are being toughened. I mean, even as we speak, today's the 25th. In 2 days' time, on May 27th, the license that's enabled Chevron to produce and to sell Venezuelan oil expires. That license has been very important to Maduro and to maintaining some kind of economic equilibrium in Venezuela. And it's not clear really where things are going from here. It seems like probably there will be another license, but it will only allow Chevron and similar companies to maintain their oil installations, but not actually to produce and sell oil. So that's a major blow to the economy.
That's a very good point. And actually, we're hearing from Bloomberg News reporting that Trump's administration preparing to issue narrowly tailored license to Chevron, allowing it to conduct, quote, minimal maintenance of essential operations in Venezuela. What do you make of that?
Well, yes, it doesn't do anything for the Venezuelan economy, which is in really bad shape. Of course, in the first 10 years of President Maduro's time in power, since 2013, the economy shrank by about 75 to 80%, did recover a little bit after that, but now it's heading downwards again. And we're looking at inflation now, which is already in three figures again, could be as much as 300% later this year. And this, of course, isn't just hurting the government. In fact, it's not mainly hurting the government. It's mainly hurting ordinary Venezuelans who are facing huge price increases of very, very low salaries. I mean, historically low, ridiculously low salaries in the public sector. So there's a lot of pain in humanitarian terms.
There's another lever here as well, isn't there, possibly? I'd like you to get your thoughts on this, Philip, which is the Aragua train, which is very big with President Trump at the moment, Venezuela based, of course. There's some quotes to suggest that they're estimated to be 15,000, 16,000 strong. This is like a trans-international organisation, more than a criminal gang. And Trump talking about, we've seen the transfer controversially to El Salvador, some of these members, the alleged members of the gang. How much of a factor is that? And also just how much of a grip under the Maduro government does this group have?
Well, really, the whole business of the Tren de Aragua, it is in fact a transnational criminal gang, but there's an awful lot of debate about just how powerful and widespread it is. There's a lot of myth making around this. In essence, what it was happening is that the Trump administration is using the presence of some members of the Tren de Aragua in the United States and the presence of some high-profile crimes committed by Venezuelan immigrants to basically demonize the whole immigrant population, which is close to 1 million Venezuelans in the United States. And this, of course, helps Trump's anti-immigrant narrative. And he's using that as well as an element in the negotiation, which is going on between Washington and the Maduro government over, how many immigrants how many deportees is Maduro going to accept, and what are they going to get in exchange for that? We've seen some of this negotiation going on in recent days. There was one of the U.S. hostages that are being held by Maduro was released the other day, and there was talk at the time that would lead to, an extension of the Chevron license. That didn't happen, but that's reflecting this battle going on within the Trump administration. What's
the state of journalism there, Philip? I remember Maria Corina Machado talking about cadenas, chains, how all of the networks, radio, TV, they had to parrot the same kind of narrative as though they were independent, but saying giving a government voice. And she was saying that, 10 years ago? Are we seeing that reflected in kind of social media as well, Instagram?
Well, life is very tough for independent journalists in Venezuela right now. There are, I think, 17 journalists currently in jail in very bad conditions with no access to their lawyers, often no access to their family, no due process, none of that. The mass media is heavily censored here. The government really controls it. A lot of very brave independent journalists who continue to work, continue to go out in the street, gather information, but it is obviously very risky. And today, as this election proceeds, journalists are being barred from voting centres. The main journalists' union is being surveilled. There are police and intelligence agents outside the door. Very threatening, very intimidatory environment.
We hear from the Venezuelan government saying they reject allegations of repression. They say they are the democratic voice of the people. Philip, just a final point from you. How do you assess the state of the Maduro government right now? Is it any weaker than it was 6 months ago, a year ago, or stronger?
I would say it's definitely weaker than it was a year ago. Of course, in July last year, the presidential election was blatantly stolen by the government. It's quite clear from the results that were eventually presented by the opposition, not by the government, that Maduro lost very heavily, and that's weakened him not only in overall terms, but also importantly within the ruling coalition. So the government is to some extent under siege, not just from outside, but also from inside. On the other hand, it does continue to control the police, the military, the security forces in general. And it's holding on to power. It doesn't seem to be possible right now to vote it out of power. And it's not clear what other alternatives are available to the opposition here on the ground. Most people, I think, are quite clear that nobody's going to come from outside to change the government. There isn't going to be a US invasion. So things are very much in the balance.
Philip, thank you. A very clear, concise account in a place where it's very hard to get trusted information, as you talked about with journalism there. Philip Gunson from the International Crisis Group, thank you in Caracas.